From the 2017 Western Governors Association meeting in Phoenix, Arizona, I'm joined now by two governors, Governor Matt Mead from Wyoming and Governor Steve Bullock from Montana, two governors who are close to each other in proximity, and I'm sure you share a lot of the same issues, too. First with you, Governor Mead, you've come here to Phoenix to meet with some of your Western governors. I got to think that you've got a lot of common issues that you're dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one, it's great to be here. We always enjoy the Western governors, partly because the issues we have in common, and we are close colleagues, and the opportunity to visit with one another and get to visit with our spouses. It's a wonderful time. So glad to be here. And one of the things that I've thought about in Western Governors Association, as I've come to know it over the last 7 years, is that more often than not, we have agreements because the West has so many things in common, and we don't separate it into Republican and Democrat. We separate it into whether it's wildfires, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's energy. We just have so many things in common, and recognizing that, we also have had the ability to work together. And as you look at Western Governors Association, we're a force because we can work together in a bipartisan fashion. We can address serious policy issues, and we can move those forwards. You look at Governor Bullock, his leadership as he was chairman, some of the things he was able to get done, and previous chairmen, we get a lot done. And we do it in a spirit of bipartisanship, and we do it with great enjoyment of each other's company.
I think that's interesting, Governor Steve Bullock from Montana. Let's talk a little bit about that bipartisanship. This is a lot different than Washington or even maybe a state legislature, the fact that you guys can get together with these common issues and solutions.
Yeah, I think that there's often, and understandably so, frustration right now in the country, saying that Democrats and Republicans can't work together. It's more about political posturing than it is actually policy or moving things forward. Now, we both have agriculture interests in our states, as an example, and the needs of a farmer or a rancher, it's not Democrat or Republican, it's a land-based issues. When we deal with things like endangered species, Governor Mead, when he was the chair, he had this great endangered species initiative where I went with him to Washington, D.C. to be in front of some of the committees. Now, on the one hand, you'd say, okay, you're just setting yourself up for challenges, but we had one another's backs. And what we do, I think, as Western governors through the WGA, because we come out with real substantive policy positions, but we work together to recognize that we won't agree on everything, but there's so much that we can actually agree. So let's capture those shared principles. And so many land-based, resource-based issues where all of us in the West are really sort of rowing and pulling in the same direction. And we can do that goes beyond sort of the typical partisanship that you're seeing every day in Washington, D.C.
It's Governor Steve Bullock from Montana. I'm going to flip it back over to Wyoming here, Governor Matt Mead. So what are some of the issues that you think are really these are Western issues? These aren't things that they don't have to deal with this in Pennsylvania or in South Carolina necessarily.
And, I suspect some of these they certainly have to deal with, but one of the issues I certainly think that will continue to be a Western issue, not exclusively Western issue, is the issue of energy. And it is a unique thing in the West because so many of our states have great energy resources, but we also recognize that for energy to do well, you also have to have a clean environment. And so that's important for our ag industry, that is important for our tourism. Both Steve and I rely heavily upon tourism, and to do that, you have to watch after the environment. And so those are complex things, trying to find where that right line is. And so when I have the ability to talk to my neighbor and friend to the north, Governor Bullock, not only can we share sort of, the same challenges, but I can learn from what Governor of Montana is doing or the Governor of Colorado is doing. Because so often we do have the same goals. We have to have outdoor recreation. We love having the public lands. We love having the opportunity for recreation. We also want to produce energy. And because of the challenges that are always, I think, inherent in energy and the environment, we can work on those things together, and we can learn from one another. And in my time at Western Governors, I would just, Steve and I have a shared interest. We both have great coal reserves in our state, and we understand the challenge with coal. I asked Governor Bullock to help participate in a project we have in Wyoming to look at not only capturing CO2 but using it in a productive way. And he was completely on board, said, absolutely, let's work together on it. And so those are the sorts of things, building from these relationships at these meetings, we get substantive things done in a proactive way that it's very gratifying. Of the organizations that I belong to, I just think this is just so effective, and it's great to be here again.
So, Governor Mead, when you think of what you want to take back to Cheyenne, you talk to these governors today, you talk to members of the administration. What is it that at the end of this conference you hope you're going to be able to take back to Wyoming?
Well, just a couple things. Just for example, this morning we met with Secretary Perdue. We have 3 secretaries, cabinet secretaries that are going to be here. 1 deputy secretary that's going to be here. The ability, for example, for the governors to sit down and talk about agriculture and to talk about the Forest Service and how we're going to address fires and forest fires in the future. That is a very productive session because we're in agreement that we have to do a better job in funding to be able to fight fires. We are in agreement that we have to be more proactive in preventing the fires in the first place and addressing beetle kill issues. And so when I go back to Wyoming, I am able to say, listen, we have worked together with Western governors and with the administration to address these issues. And so those are things that are real. We talked about the Endangered Species Act with the Deputy Secretary from Interior today. Those are issues that the Western governors has worked on for a couple of years now. And those things we're making progress, not just in we're signing something, but bills are going before Congress. And as Steve said, he and I went back together and testified before Congress. And I think it was, you of course get the outside who say, well, you shouldn't sit down with the Democrat, and the Democrat shouldn't sit down with the Republican. We dismiss that. There's a greater
Neighbors, right?
We're neighbors, and there's greater opportunity to work together than against each other.
And for those listening, Governor Mead from Wyoming is a Republican, and Governor Bullock from Montana is a Democrat.
Oh, wait a minute, he is? I didn't know that.
But you're Westerners and you're governors, and I'll ask you the same question. What do you hope to take back to Helena?
Yeah, I think even this morning, I look at this past summer, I had 1.3 million acres burned. And having to, first of all, explain to Washington, D.C., 1 fire was the size of 6 districts of Columbia. But we can come together and say, we're spending more and more of our money not actually working in the woods, both treating forests and restoring watersheds, but just putting out fires. Fire borrowing, more and more of the agency's budget is going to that. The unified voice where we actually come together and we sit down with the Secretary of Agriculture, former governor himself, and the Chief of the Forest Service and say, we're with you to try to fix this. Now, what I'll come back to Helena with from this meeting is not only good discussions with my fellow governors, but as we're handling some of the issues, we look at workforce. So many of our states in the West were really doing pretty well. Our unemployment rate is darn low, but we've got to figure out how to make sure that our workers have the skills that businesses need. So being able to sit down with the Secretary of Labor and throw out some of our ideas, our work with Department of Ag and others. So it's both the energizing of our peer group as governors is pretty darn small, right? There's only 50 in the flag territories. So to get good ideas from them and then the unified voice that we can share as we work with the administration and others.
I remember that you're a snowboarder.
You remembered someone else.
I remember he maybe bought the equipment, but again, I can't actually use it.
So
we actually had the best. One thing that Governor Mead would probably also agree that we have the best snow skiing throughout the West too, in Montana.
No, I totally disagree.
Okay, we don't
with
agree on everything. Yeah.
So we're the listeners to this interview really are listening on the iHeartRadio digital platform.
Yeah,
that's all about sound. So I'm going to ask you guys a question. So what kind of music do you like to listen to, Governor Mead?
I thought those were supposed to be softball questions. So, no, so
Eclectic, is that the answer?
you know, I grew up. So I grew up in a ranching community, and so I listened to a lot of country western music. I like some of the new country western music, but you know, I still like to listen to Waylon Jennings and Johnny Cash. Those are on my playlist. My kids, I have relatively young kids, teenagers, and what is interesting to me is they have some of the new music, but they're also listening to 80s music and 70s music. And my son particularly plays, you know, a song from the 70s. He said, "Dad, have you ever heard this?" I'm like, I am so gratified you are listening to my music. The unfortunate thing is occasionally in private I'll break out and dance, and that's when the session ends.
So Governor Steve Bullock from Montana, I mean, what are your listening habits? I know you're a news radio listener, too.
Well, and much the same as Governor Mead, that my listening habits are now supplanted by a 15-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old son, which is listening to music that wasn't quite, you know, as I grew up in the 80s, but it is fun every now and then when they're hearing something like, "Oh, that song from Journey, Don't Stop Believin'. Dad, have you ever heard it?" And I'm like, thank you. Welcome to our world where we can still understand the words that are being sung.
You know, I think that and just to kind of continue this theme for just a second here, you think of a rural area like Wyoming or Montana, there are a lot of people out there who maybe don't have access to a lot of media, and I would think that radio is probably a lifeline for a lot of those folks.
It absolutely is. You know, one of the things, the ability on the long distances we have to drive in these large rural states, you know, it's nice to have some good tunes along the way, and whether it's Fleetwood Mac or Johnny Cash or whatever it may be, I will tell you, this is, and you probably had this too, Governor Bullock. My first campaign, we put in excess on just one vehicle, 100,000 miles driving around to every. And still, I did that with my wife and often with my two little kids at the time. We will hear a song today, and it'll take us back to 2010, that first campaign, and where we were and how many times. And I can't tell you how often my son or my daughter or my wife say, "You remember this song? This is where we were. This is when you were getting ready for your third debate." And it's amazing how that music brings you back to a point in time and who you were with and the memories shared. And so, yeah, in the rural states, having some tunes to go along with
And news too, right?
Tunes and news, and you know, you're out there looking at the wildlife and getting informed or listening to music. It's wonderful.
And I think what's great about like iHeartRadio and others now is, just as another example, I can go on my iPad in the morning and listen to my Montana public radio station. So much of this now, we're not even fixed to the point of you got to have the signal. It's from the perspective of being able to get it online, and those opportunities really do open up some great things for us.
I'm going to ask you one final question here, and I know what the political answer is going to be, but I'd like for you to kind of give me your real thought here. As we look to the future, I mean, we have midterm elections coming up by this time next year. Then we've got a presidential election coming up in 2020. Let's assume that the slate is clean. For whatever reason, the current incumbent President Trump decides he's not going to run. Is there anybody out there that you like as a Republican candidate or anyone who could be a standard bearer for the party, Governor Mead?
Well, a couple things I'll say. One is, you know, my belief always is, and I understand your question, the caveat that slate is clean. You know, whether it's a Republican or Democrat president, I want the president to do well because I want the country to do well. And so let's just to your hypothetical in 2020, the slate is clean. I won't give you a name, but I'll tell you this. I am very partial to governors. And, you know, on the Republican side, last time we had a number of Republican governors who were in the race. And I do that, and maybe it's a limited perspective, but in the role of governor, you know, the buck stops with you. You have to make hard decisions. You'll have good revenue days and bad revenue years, I should say. But the buck stops with you, and you also have to recognize that it's not just what you do, but how you do it. And in small rural states, Governor Bullock, he needs to work with Democrats and Republicans and none of the above, and that's the same in Wyoming. And we recognize as governors that when you have a challenge to somebody's idea, it should be about the idea and not the person. And that is so important because, as you say, so-and-so this and so-and-so that, that's somebody's brother or sister or aunt or grandpa. And so I think we really learn that as governors, and particularly in rural states, is that you not only have an obligation to do things, you have an obligation to do them in a way that not only creates that cordial atmosphere, but really inspires the next generation of political leaders to say, this is a business I want to get in, because it looks like it's a challenge, but it can also be done in a civil way. And so I won't give you a name, but I'm hoping in future presidential elections, whether it's 4 years, 8 years, that we continue to, I think, get excited, the next generation, to get involved in politics, because our republic, our democracy requires people wanting to serve, and they're only going to want to serve if it looks like overall it's a pleasant experience.
Yeah, I think that
Governor Bullock.
2020 is certainly a long way away from that perspective, and I share Governor Mead's thoughts in as much as both in lifting up the system. I mean, my first day of the state with young kids, I said, we all need to be acting and treating one another like our kids are watching and learning from us, because they are, our words and our deeds. And we need to be working. I think Western governors do work together in a way that elevates the overall system. I also share the idea that it comes, that governors actually do things. Like, we have to run agencies and run government. It's not about just giving speeches. So hopefully, as we go forward, we'll be looking at more governors as the possibilities for president. And, as far as names, I'll only throw out one, and that's on the Republican side. That'll be Matt Mead.
Thanks. I want to thank Governor Matt Mead from Wyoming and Governor Steve Bullock from
I love having the
Montana.
last word.
Where are the electric paddles? I just got to be.
Thank you for joining us. We're at the 2017 Western Governors Association meeting in Phoenix, Arizona. We've been joined by Governor of Montana, Steve Bullock, and Wyoming Governor Matt Mead. Thank you again for joining us, and good luck with your meetings in Phoenix.
Thanks for having us
Thanks
on.
so much for having us.